Alright, so at this point a lot of you are probably familiar with the usual PS Vita analog stick upgrade. However, you rarely see the 3DS ones. And at this point, if you're already drooling over this one, well, you have seen nothing. I told myself I've done the 3DS and the Vita, so why not take it a step further? And I thought about these two, the 360 and the Xbox One, which at first glance they look like they have the same footprint, but in fact they do not. And that's because the 360 thumbstick is slightly bigger than the Xbox One, and because of that I settled on the Xbox One controller. So before I go ahead and show you how to do it, let's go over the parts and tools that you need. And at the end of the video, we'll be playing some games and testing out each stick and giving you guys my thoughts. So, let's get started. So, for this one, you'll need flush cutters, 600 grit wet sandpaper, B7000 glue, and finally, a donor analog stick for your corresponding PSP, and a spare upgrade stick of your choice, which I'll leave links for in the description down below. So, like I said in the beginning, it's a very simple process, but kinda tedious. We first start off by sanding the PSP stick down to a flat level, then we grab our upgrade stick of choice, snip the bottom half, and also sand it down to a flat level. Then you finish it off with some B7000 glue, and then just throw it all together. Now in terms of difficulty, if you're using a 1000 model, it's a very easy process as you don't have to take apart the shell, you can just simply pop it on top and be good to go. And the best part is you can actually hot swap it without having to do any extra modifications to the new sticks that you're making. But since people kept losing their tips on the 1000 models, Sony decided to make these permanent and non-removable unless you remove the front shell, which was great as it stops you from losing your stick, but in this case, we're gonna have to actually modify it and make it detachable. So now that you have a general idea, let's go ahead and show you how to trim and prepare these parts, then I'll show you how to do it on fat models, followed by the slim models. So first we have the PS Vita. These are rubberized on the top, and they have a dust gasket on the bottom. So you wanna start off by ripping this apart. Alright, and then you wanna go ahead and snip the bottom off. Now it's a pretty straightforward process, but if you're not careful, you might actually distort the flat top here, as the bottom part here is very strong and it'll require you to kind of be careful, take your time with it until you can snip it off. So snip at it from every angle and try to get it as flat as possible, which will make your life a whole lot easier when you start sanding. A little bit of water, and I highly recommend a wet sandpaper as it will make things go a whole lot smoother. So go at it, give it even pressure, do it in a circular motion on a flat surface. Hold on, we need some dramatic lighting here. All right, let's go. Nope, we need some more. All right. All right, so at this point, here's what that looks like. It's perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, and pretty much ready to go. Now you may notice that I'm also sanding down my thumb here, and one way you can get a better grip on it is by getting a little bit of putty, plopping on top to get a nicer grip, then you can keep going. That's a little hack for you. Just be careful that it doesn't overflow and then end up on the actual sandpaper, which will kind of ruin it. And that should look a little something like this. Now you can go wash it off and set it aside. Now let me show you how to do it with a 3DS stick. But before I do that, I do want to mention that there are fake ones and original ones. And there are two ways you can tell if you're ordering cheap ones. Usually you'll find them for around $1 or less. They come in a variety of different colors, and it's hard to see with the black one, but if we grab the blue one here, you'll see that the back is not colored. And that's because the color that you see here is a cheap rubberized paint. And to be honest, I don't know how long this will last. It should still be a substantial upgrade over the PSP one. And for reference, here's what an original one looks like in a standard color. So if you're interested, I'll leave links for them in the description down below. So anyways, back to snipping. This one should be very easy to do. One snip should be enough, and the rest should be pretty much the same. Look at all that material. And that should look a little something like this. And finally, we have the Xbox stick. This will be the toughest one out of them all, as it will require a lot of sanding. It's a bigger piece, that's for sure. And these pliers I'm using, I'll have to open them a bit more than usual and try to chop it up. And get it as close as possible to the bottom. And here's the current progress. If you can, try to get at least half of this. But for the sake of time, I'm just gonna roll with this, so let's move on to the next step and show you how to install it on fat and slim models, starting with the 1000 models. So go ahead and grab your donor, and since it's so small and there's barely any grip, I would recommend having a piece of putty to get some nice even pressure when you're getting started, and once it is relatively flattened, you can go ahead and use your fingers. And that should look a little something like this. It's pretty flat, and it's been trimmed down just enough to reduce the height. So now let's go ahead and talk about these slim models, and what you have to do to get it working properly, as there are two ways you can go about it. But first, let me go ahead and quickly sand it over, and I'll be back in just a bit here. So as I was saying, since the original sticks can only be installed from the inside, anything bigger is just simply not going to work. So the logical way to do it is to install it from the inside first, and then simply plop some glue and glue it on top like so. If you run into any issues, then you're going to have to remove the glue, open up the whole console again, and have to do that a couple more times to get it to fit properly. What I ended up doing was to completely remove the retaining system, and just use a similar system to the OG fat models. So that's what we're going to do. So first we're going to start off by trimming the outer part. And that should look a little something like this. Now if we go ahead and quickly test it out here, that works perfectly fine. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and clean off the edges here that I just trimmed off, and then move on to the final step, which is gluing. Alright, so all the parts have been washed and cleaned. Let's get gluing. So I already got an Xbox One for the fat model. This time I'm going to do it for the slim model and see how it turns out. But before we do that, one very important note about the glue of your choice. You could use super glue, but it's very messy and very risky for something this small. If you mess up, if you get it anywhere, on your fingers, on the wrong side of the stick, you're pretty much screwed. There's no way about it. However, with the B7000, it takes time to cure, it's very easy to clean. From the moment you paste it on, it's going to start curing slowly, which allows you to do micro adjustments to make sure the two pieces are perfectly aligned. And the most important part, in my opinion, is that you can actually remove it and reapply it in case you have done something wrong, or you want to replace the top altogether when you don't have any spare tops. As you can see, the material here is very flexible, and once it's bonded to two surfaces, it's going to be on there pretty well. So if you ever have to separate the two pieces, it should be a pretty straightforward process. Alright, so step one, get familiar with your pieces. Visualize how it should look like. Then you want to go ahead and grab your glue, add a little dab, get it evenly spread. That should be enough. We can flip it over to get a nice visual, slightly press it down, give it a few pokes here and there to center it, and set it aside. And the same goes for the rest of them. That's the 3DS top, and you pretty much get the idea. And since they're roughly the same size, it's pretty easy to center. Alright, so we'll set these aside to cure, and we'll be back in just a bit. So as you can see, the beauty of the B7000, right now it's pretty firm, but you can still nudge it here and there to do some micro adjustments to make sure that it's centered. Alright, so here we are a couple hours later, and you are supposed to leave these to dry for around 24 to 48 hours. You can start using them within a couple hours, but if you want them to fully cure without shifting, because if you start using it, it might shift a little bit. If that happens, that's alright. B7000 is easy to take off. Like how it is when I took off the blue one, because I forgot where I was going to put this. It was going to go on this blue slim, but I quickly found out how quickly this will actually wear out. So I sprayed some alcohol. As I was taking it apart, it started shedding its color. And that's not good, because if it's going with alcohol, then it's going to definitely go if you have oily skin. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the collection of upgraded thumb pads. Let's go ahead and get started with the most ridiculous one. So here's one that's using the Xbox One controller. As you can imagine, it gives you a ton of grip. However, if you're using the D-pad frequently, then you'll notice that your thumb is going to be touching it quite often, which is going to be annoying. But if you're not paying attention when pressing the down arrow, you'll be slightly pressing down on the analog stick. But thankfully with the 1000 models, it's a pretty easy process. You just pop it off and stick on whichever one you want, which is what we've done on the slim models as well. We snipped off the drop stopper, and now we have a freely removable stick, which is pretty awesome. So now we get that luxury too with the added bonus of losing it. Alright, so here we are with some Outrun, and I absolutely love this game. It's one of my favorite games of all time on the PSP. It just looks gorgeous, the levels are amazing, and it's an insane amount of fun to play with a group of people. So yeah, the Vita Thumbstick here is pretty sweet. It's definitely way better than the original one, and that's mostly all thanks to the rubberized tip. Whenever I'm hitting the down arrow, I can still feel it under my thumb, but it's definitely way less annoying than the Xbox one. Which now, if we go ahead and switch to it, and yeah, it's a whole lot grippier, feels much nicer. But if you have a game that has different functions for the D-pad and stick, then it's going to definitely get annoying as you're going to constantly feel that giant stick right under your thumb. And for that, here we are a week later and I have trimmed it down as much as possible. How much, you may ask? Well, here's what it looks like side by side with the original one. And if we go ahead and measure it, we got 4.65 for the full size. And as for the trimmed down version, we got 2 millimeters. And in comparison to the 3DS one, it's very close. And I would have kept going if I didn't see the rubber showing on the bottom. That's coming from the concave dimple here. If I kept going, I probably would have went right through it and ended up with a hole in the middle. So that was a no-go. And to get to this point, it took me about 20 minutes of filing and sanding, which was honestly a pain, but I'm pretty certain that the results are going to be definitely worth it. And while we're here, here's a quick tip for you. Before you start gluing, make sure you do a dry fit. If they sit flat, you're good to go. If not, and you see that the outer ends are kind of bent, just go ahead and bend them inwards. For example, for the PSP side, you can grab them from the ends and ever so slightly bend them upwards. As for the Xbox One, you simply bend it downwards. And for both of them, you do that all around until you get a perfectly flat fitment. And for now, we're going to take a look at the 3DS thumbstick, followed by the bonus round. So now let's try out the non-original 3DS stick. In terms of grip, well, like I said before, it doesn't have much grip, since the one we're using is cheap knockoff and it's got a cheap coating on top. But if it was an original one, it would definitely be a ton better. But if you want to know how much better, well, you can stick around this channel and I'll eventually have a community post on it. and talk about how much better the original 3DS analog stick is. Overall, it's not bad. It's definitely better than the original PSP, but still has a little bit of slip issues. Right now, things are not sweaty, but once it gets sweaty, it's going to start slipping. Alright, so you're probably asking, what's this bonus round? Well, if you have paid attention to the thumbnail or the title, then you probably already know where this is going. So I did the Xbox, the Vita, and the 3DS, and I just felt like something was missing. And that's when I remembered the Switch. So at this point, you already know where this is going, so I'm going to go ahead, cut it, sand it, and we'll jump right into the testing. So I'm wearing a glove now because my right thumb and index finger have started to hurt, and that's because I went through like 8 to 10 different tips just for this video, and the best part is I'm still not done. So at some point, around the 3.3mm mark, as you can see, I can actually peel it off if I want, so I'm pretty sure this is the upper limit for the Switch thumbstick. And while I'm here, let me push the limit on this one as well. Whoops, I ended up separating the bottom base that keeps the rubber on top, so it's safe to say that I have completely surpassed any limits on this one. We are beyond the limits and we have to do something very janky. We can drop this piece completely and just glue the 3 pieces together. Alright, so let's go ahead and finally retest the PS Vita thumbstick that's been height reduced. It's been sanded down so much that it started falling apart, but we did manage to save it. And to test that, we're playing some Shrek Team Tag Racing. Yeah, I didn't know this thing existed. And all I can really say is that the PS Vita thumbstick might just be the right one for the PSP. Since the shape and footprint is very similar, and it's one of the only ones that you can height reduce to this extent. So as of right now, it will be on the top of the list. So let's go ahead and move on and test the next one. So back to the Xbox, this time it's fully trimmed down, and if you take a look here, we can see that it's touching the bottom of the D-pad. But upon further inspection, it's actually no problem, as that's pretty much the limit. Right where the analog stops, it touches the D-pad. And for reference, you got a diameter of around 16mm to work with in case you decide to use a different thumbstick. Make sure it's under 16 and you should be good to go. So how does it play? Well, if you're playing racing games and all you use is the analog, then this is going to be perfect as it locks you in and gives you full control. But for everything else that requires D-pad, you will still feel it ever so slightly right under your thumb. It's one of the least annoying ones as we have trimmed it down to the max. Now let's go ahead and try a hybrid, that being the Switch one. So I know this video has been all over the place, but here's one last tip. If your thumbstick is wobbling too much and tilting way too much, what you can do is light it up with a lighter for about a second, squeeze it a tiny bit, and then quickly put it back into your PSP. And that would give it a nice snug fit. It's pretty strong, it's not going to go anywhere, unless you put some serious force behind it until it pops off. So here we are with the Switch analog stick, and it's a very unique experience, that's for sure. Compared to the concave Xbox and the convex PS Vita, it's very interesting. I don't know how much I like it until I go back to the Vita one, because most of these sticks were designed with a 3D analog stick in mind. And here we're playing with a 2D analog stick, so it's not exactly how it was meant to be used. But overall, if you got a spare laying around, why not use it? Now when it comes to the D-pad, you will definitely feel it under your thumb, and that's with it fully trimmed down. So even if you have it fully trimmed down or right before it starts falling apart, it's still not enough to stop you from feeling it under your D-pad. So that's the downside with this one. And try the Vita one more time. And yeah, I would say this is a whole lot better, that's for sure. Alright guys, so after a week of filing, sanding, testing, and some more testing, I have come to the conclusion that the PS Vita analog stick is the definitive upgrade for the PSP. The other ones are nice, don't get me wrong, but this is just perfect. And there are a few reasons why. First off, the engineers at Sony, they have designed the original stick with a convex shape. The Vita is also convex, but with the added bonus of rubber on top. The footprint is also very similar to the original one, and when fully trimmed down, it gives you the perfect transition between the two. When pressing the D-pad, your thumb barely touches it, and when you're switching back and forth, there's nothing to snag on. Here's what that looks like with the Switch. It's not as smooth, and here it is one last time with the fully trimmed Xbox. Going from D-pad to analog, it's easy, but from analog to the D-pad, it's not a smooth experience, as your thumb will get caught inside of it. And with all that being said guys, that is all for this video. So it's been a very long week, my fingers hurt, but we got to test out a ton of different variations, and really explore the world of upgrading your PSP's thumbstick. I know, this thing is 20 years old and we're still looking at it. It is a beautiful piece of tech. If you have any questions, do let me know in the comment section below. Links for everything will be in the description. We got a ton more mods to explore, so stay tuned. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care everyone.